Chicago, 1952. The snow hasn't fallen yet, but something far colder creeps through the streets of back of the yards. Salvatore DeLuca, a feared mobster with blood on his hands and ghosts in his closet, should have died the night they came for him. But he didn't, not even close. After that night, nothing about Sal was the same. Shadows began to move before the light. His enemies died in ways no bullet could explain. And the mirror in the old DeLuca family home stopped reflecting only his face. He claims he made a deal that night, a deal that made him untouchable. But what kind of deal makes death step aside? And what exactly did it take in return? Now as his estranged granddaughter returns to the house that holds all his secrets, the whispers grow louder, the walls remember. The clocks stop, and the deal may not be done yet. What did Sal bargain away, and what's coming to collect? Keep listening, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This story is just getting started. Chapter 1. The Return, Chicago, January 1952. The winter wind sliced through back of the yards like a butcher's knife, fitting for a neighborhood built on slaughterhouses. A curtain of snow drifted down through the amber glow of street lamps, dusting the brim of Rosie DeLuca's felt hat as she stepped off the bus. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she stood motionless, luggage clutched in her gloved hands, staring up at the imposing three-story brownstone that loomed at the end of the block. 17 years old and already carrying more grief than most people twice her age, Rosie pulled her coat tighter. The journey from California had drained her, but not as much as the funeral 3 days ago. Her mother, beautiful, stubborn Teresa DeLuca, was gone, leaving behind nothing but debts, memories, and a letter addressed to a father she'd sworn never to contact again. "You need family now," her mother had whispered in those final days, her once vibrant voice reduced to a rasp. "Even if that family is him." A taxi crawled past, its tires crunching on fresh snow, momentarily illuminating the street sign, Morgan Avenue. The driver slowed, probably wondering why a young woman would be standing alone in this neighborhood after dark. Rosie waved him on. This was something she had to do alone. The neighborhood had changed in the 12 years since she'd last visited. Some buildings stood abandoned, their windows like hollow eyes watching her progress. Others showed signs of new life, fresh paint, neatly swept stoops. But the smell remained the same, a peculiar blend of coal smoke, distant stockyards, and something distinctly Chicago. As she approached the house, a curtain twitched in the front window. She paused at the iron gate, its intricate scrollwork partially obscured by frost. Behind this gate lived Salvatore DeLuca, her grandfather, the monster from her mother's cautionary tales, the shadow that had loomed over their lives in exile. The porch steps creaked beneath her weight. Before she could knock, the heavy oak door swung open, revealing a man who seemed both exactly as she remembered and completely foreign. Salvatore Sal DeLuca stood in the doorway, backlit by the amber glow of the foyer. At 67, he remained imposing, broad-shouldered and straight-backed despite his years. His once black hair had turned steel gray, slicked back in the same style he'd worn for decades. Deep lines carved valleys around his mouth and eyes, telling stories of hard living and harder decisions. He wore a pressed white shirt, dark trousers with suspenders and house slippers, casual attire that somehow didn't diminish his authority. For a long moment, neither spoke. The neighborhood sounds receded. No distant radios, no passing cars, just the soft hiss of falling snow. "You look like your mother," he finally said, his voice a graveled rumble, accent still heavy despite 40 years in America. Rosie swallowed hard. "People usually say I look like my father." Something flickered across Sal's face, pain perhaps or regret. "I wouldn't know." He stepped aside. "Come inside before you freeze to death. Chicago winter doesn't care who your family is." The house's interior was like stepping into a time capsule. Heavy velvet drapes, ornate furniture that had been fashionable 20 years earlier, and the overwhelming scent of furniture polish and cigar smoke. Photos in gilded frames lined the walls, generations of DeLucas staring out from behind glass. Rosie noticed her mother's wedding photo was still displayed prominently, though the glass was clouded with age. "Vittoria will show you to your room," Sal said, gesturing to a small round woman emerging from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's been with me since before you were born." The housekeeper's face softened upon seeing Rosie. "Miss Teresa's little girl. "Full grown-up," she said, her Italian accent even thicker than Sal's. "I'm so sorry about your mama. She was a good woman." Rosie nodded, afraid that speaking would break the tenuous hold she had on her emotions. Vittoria seemed to understand, gently taking one of her bags. "Your grandfather had your mother's old room prepared," Vittoria continued as she led Rosie up the creaking staircase. "I put fresh linens on the bed this morning." The second-floor hallway was lined with more photographs, Sal with various men in suits, shaking hands, cutting ribbons. Newspaper clippings framed like achievements. Rosie recognized her grandfather in the Chicago Tribune, standing outside his import business. The import business. The legitimate face of operations her mother had only spoken of in whispers. The reason they'd fled to California when Rosie was 5. The reason they'd changed their name to her father's, Morgan, after he'd disappeared. Her mother's childhood bedroom was like a shrine, preserved exactly as she'd left it decades ago. A vanity with silver-backed brushes, a bookshelf filled with classics and schoolbooks, a cedar chest at the foot of the 4-poster bed. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," Vittoria said, placing Rosie's bag on a velvet ottoman. "Your grandfather eats at 7 sharp." She hesitated at the door. "He's been different since he got your letter. Quieter. He even went to church last Sunday for the first time in years." With that cryptic comment, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone, Rosie sank onto the bed, running her fingers over the satin coverlet. She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew the worn photograph that had accompanied her mother's letter to Sal. It showed her parents on their wedding day, Teresa radiant in white, her handsome father James smiling nervously. On the back, in her mother's elegant script, "What matters most is what we leave behind." From downstairs came the low murmur of voices, Sal speaking to someone in rapid Italian. A clock somewhere in the house chimed the quarter hour. Outside, Chicago continued its slow transformation under January snow. Rosie moved to the window, parting the heavy curtains. From this vantage point, she could see the neighborhood stretching toward the distant glow of downtown. Somewhere in that sprawl of humanity, her father had vanished 17 years ago. Somewhere in this very house, her mother had grown up in fear before finding the courage to leave, and now, like a strange echo of history, Rosie had returned. Not as a DeLuca reclaiming her heritage, but as a lost girl with nowhere else to go. If this story has touched something in you, this tale of family bonds that both heal and hurt, please consider subscribing to join our storytelling community. Sometimes the stories that resonate most deeply are the ones that remind us of our own complicated histories. The grandfather clock downstairs chimed 7 times. Dinner with Salvatore DeLuca awaited. The past and future converged in this moment, and Rosie DeLuca straightened her shoulders as she prepared to face both. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past, Dinner with Salvatore. DeLuca was a masterclass in uncomfortable silence. The dining room felt cavernous, dominated by a mahogany table that could seat 12 but now held only 2 place settings at opposite ends. Crystal chandeliers cast kaleidoscope shadows across the paisley wallpaper, and a fire crackled in the marble hearth, unable to dispel the deeper chill between grandfather and granddaughter. Vittoria served them osso buco with saffron risotto, comfort food from the old country. Though nothing about this meal felt comfortable. The china plates were rimmed with gold, the silverware heavy in Rosie's hand. Every clink of cutlery echoed like a gunshot. "Your mother," Sal began suddenly, breaking a 15-minute silence. "Did she suffer?" Rosie looked up, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. "At the end, they gave her morphine. The doctor said she didn't feel pain." Sal nodded, then took a long drink of his wine, a Barolo so dark it was almost black in the firelight. "And her funeral?" "It was appropriate, simple. Like she wanted." Rosie pushed risotto around her plate. "Not many people came. We moved around a lot." "Always running," Sal muttered, almost to himself. Then louder, "Your letter said you finished high school early." "Last spring. I was working as a typist at an insurance office until—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Until her mother got sick. Until the money ran out. Until everything collapsed. Smart, like Teresa." He gestured with his fork. "Oh, your grandmother Constanza was the same way. Could do figures in her head faster than any banker." The mention of her grandmother sparked Rosie's curiosity. "I don't remember her. She died before you were born. Cancer like Teresa." His voice grew distant. "She came to America with nothing but a suitcase and her rosary beads. Built everything alongside me." A portrait of Constanza DeLuca hung in the parlor. A severe woman with intelligent eyes and Teresa's high cheekbones. Rosie had passed it earlier, noticing how her grandfather's gaze had lingered on it. "Mom never talked about her. Your mother erased everything about this family when she left." The words carried no accusation, just resigned acceptance. "I'm sure she had her reasons." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times. Sal dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin and rose. "I have a business meeting. Don't wait up. At 9 o'clock. His eyes flickered with something, amusement perhaps. Import business operates on international schedules. He adjusted his cufflinks, solid gold with tiny rubies catching the light. "Vittoria will bring you dessert, cannoli, your mother's favorite." After he left, the house seemed to exhale. Rosie could hear Vittoria humming in the kitchen, the pipes clanging as someone ran water upstairs, the distant wail of a police siren somewhere in the city. Without Sal's presence, the mansion felt less intimidating, more like an elderly relative with stories to tell if one only knew how to listen. When Vittoria brought the cannoli, delicate pastry tubes filled with sweetened ricotta and dotted with pistachios, Rosie seized her chance. "Vittoria, how long have you worked for my grandfather?" The housekeeper settled into a chair, her face softening. "Since 1925, I was 16, fresh off the boat from Sicily." She crossed herself. "Your grandmother hired me as a kitchen girl. Back then, there were 4 of us staff in the house. What was she like?" "My grandmother?" "Constanza." Vittoria smiled. Strong, practical, ran this house like a general, but kind in her way. "When my mother died, she paid to bring my younger sisters to America." Rosie tried a bite of cannoli, closing her eyes at the rush of sweetness. "And my mother? What was she like growing up?" Vittoria's expression grew guarded. "Miss Teresa was complicated. Stubborn like your grandfather, but soft-hearted like her mother. She loved books and music. She used to play the piano in the conservatory for hours." She nodded toward a closed door off the main hall. "We had a piano in California," Rosie said quietly. "She taught me to play. That would please her mother." Vittoria hesitated. "Your grandfather couldn't bear to hear music after Teresa left. Had the piano covered. It's still there, though." Rosie gathered her courage. "Why did she leave, Vittoria, really?" "Mom would never talk about it, just said Grandpa was dangerous." The housekeeper's weathered hands twisted in her apron. "It's not my place to tell family stories. Please, I need to understand." Vittoria glanced toward the front door as if checking that Sal was truly gone. "It was after your father disappeared. Miss Teresa was heartbroken, terrified. There were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "That your grandfather—" She lowered her voice. "That he might have been involved. Mr. DeLuca never approved of James Morgan. Said he wasn't good enough for Teresa." A chill that had nothing to do with the January weather crept up Rosie's spine. "Are you saying my grandfather had something to do with my father's disappearance?" "I'm saying nothing of the sort," Vittoria replied sharply. "Just that Teresa believed it. They had a terrible fight. She took you in the night and left. Broke his heart, though he'd never admit it." She stood suddenly. "I've said too much already." After Vittoria retreated to the kitchen, Rosie wandered the main floor of the house, studying the photographs that chronicled the DeLuca family history. Most were formal portraits or business occasions, but occasionally she glimpsed more intimate moments. A much younger Sal teaching a small Teresa to ride a bicycle, Constanza in a garden with roses climbing a trellis behind her. In the parlor, she found herself drawn to a roll-top desk in the corner. The top was locked, but one of the small drawers beneath was partially open. Inside was a stack of newspaper clippings. Yellowed with age, the top one made her breath catch. "Local teacher missing. Foul play suspected." Below was a photograph of her father, James Morgan, 30 years old with kind eyes and a serious expression. The article described him as a respected mathematics instructor who failed to return home on January 12, 1935. Rosie's hands trembled as she read the faded print. There was a quote from her mother described as the distraught wife. "James would never leave willingly. Something has happened to him." A floorboard creaked behind her. Rosie whirled around, the clipping still in her hand. Frank Caruso, her grandfather's bodyguard and driver, stood in the doorway. In his 50s, with thinning hair and shoulders like a bull, he regarded her impassively. "Miss DeLuca, Mr. Salvatore asked me to check that the house was secure before I left for the night." Rosie quickly tucked the clipping into her skirt pocket. "I was just looking around." Frank's eyes flicked to the desk, then back to her. "Best not to disturb Mr. Salvatore's private things. He values his privacy." "Of course." She stepped away from the desk. "I was actually looking for the conservatory. Vittoria mentioned there's a piano." Something like sympathy crossed Frank's weathered face. "Through those doors, miss, but it hasn't been played in years." The conservatory was a glass-enclosed room at the back of the house, overlooking what must have been a garden in warmer months, now buried under snow. Moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, illuminating the shrouded shape in the center of the room, a baby grand piano draped in heavy cloth. With reverence, Rosie pulled back the cover, revealing polished ebony. When she pressed a key, the note that sounded was surprisingly in tune. Someone had maintained this instrument despite its disuse. On the music stand sat a book of Chopin nocturnes open to Opus 9, No. 2 in E-flat major, her mother's favorite piece, the one she'd insisted Rosie learn by heart. As her fingers found the familiar opening notes, Rosie felt a connection to her mother stronger than any she'd experienced since the funeral. The melody unwound like a silver thread through the moonlit room, carrying with it memories of their small apartment in San Francisco, her mother's patient instruction, the rare moments of joy in a life spent looking over their shoulders. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice the figure standing in the doorway until she'd finished the piece. When she looked up, Sal was watching her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "I'm sorry," Rosie said quickly. "Vittoria mentioned the piano and I—" "You play like her," Sal interrupted, his voice rough. "Like Teresa." He stepped into the room, moonlight revealing his face, older now, more vulnerable without the armor of his daytime authority. He'd removed his tie, and the top button of his shirt was undone. He smelled faintly of whiskey and cold night air. "She taught you well. She said music was the one thing no one could take from you." Sal made a small, pained sound. "She would know." He moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. "Your father taught mathematics the same way, with passion. It was the only thing I respected about him." Rosie's heart quickened. "You knew my father well?" "I made it my business to know everything about the man my daughter loved." He didn't turn from the window. Even when I disapproved, the newspaper clipping seemed to burn in Rosie's pocket. "What happened to him?" Sal's shoulders stiffened. When he finally turned, his face had hardened again, the momentary vulnerability gone. "It's late. We both should sleep." As he moved toward the door, Rosie gathered her courage. "People said you were involved. That's why Mom took me and ran." He stopped, one hand on the doorframe. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Your mother believed what she needed to believe," he finally said. "The truth is rarely what we want it to be." Before she could press further, he was gone, footsteps receding down the hallway. Rosie remained at the piano, fingers resting lightly on keys that held echoes of both her parents, one long dead, the other freshly buried. Outside, Chicago slumbered under its blanket of snow, secrets buried deep beneath layers of time and silence. But like the spring that would eventually come, Rosie knew that some truths couldn't stay buried forever. The newspaper clipping in her pocket was just the beginning. She closed the piano gently and replaced its shroud. But the music lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of all that had been lost and perhaps of what might yet be found. Chapter 3. The Ledger morning arrived with a fresh dusting of snow and the distant clatter of Vittoria preparing breakfast. Rosie had slept fitfully, dreams filled with piano melodies and her father's face from the newspaper clipping. She dressed quickly in a navy wool skirt and cream blouse, then made her way downstairs, following the aroma of fresh coffee and fried potatoes. The kitchen was the heart of the house, warm, inviting, with copper pots hanging from a rack and herbs growing in pots along the windowsill. Vittoria bustled between the stove and a heavy wooden table where place settings for two awaited. "Good morning, Miss Rosie. Breakfast in 5 minutes." She gestured to a percolator. "Coffee's ready if you want to pour yourself a cup. Your grandfather takes his black. He eats in the kitchen?" Rosie asked, surprised after the formality of last night's dinner. "Only breakfast. Says business meetings are for the dining room, family is for the kitchen. Vittoria smiled. The Mr. Salvatore you see at breakfast is different from the one the rest of Chicago knows. As if summoned by his name, Sal appeared in the doorway, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, though his feet were still in slippers and his hair wasn't yet perfectly combed. He looked more human this way, less the feared businessman, more the aging grandfather. "You're up early," he noted, accepting a coffee cup from Rosie with a nod of thanks. Teresa was never a morning person. "Mom said it was the Italian in her," Rosie replied. "I take after my father that way." "He was always up before dawn," she said. Something flickered across Sal's face. Not anger exactly, but a tightening around the eyes. James was punctual. I'll give him that. Vittoria set plates before them. Frittata with potatoes and sausage, thick slices of fresh bread with butter and honey. For a few minutes they ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the clink of cutlery and the occasional creak of the old house settling. "I need to go to the bank this morning," Sal said eventually. "And you should come with me." Rosie looked up, surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because we need to discuss your future." He took a sip of coffee. "Unless you're planning to return to California." The question caught her off guard. "I don't have anything to go back to. The apartment is gone. Mom's medical bills took everything." Sal nodded as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "Then it's time we settled a few matters. Be ready in an hour." Downtown Chicago was a different world from back of the yards. Gleaming buildings reaching skyward, streets bustling with businessmen in overcoats and women in fur-trimmed hats. Frank drove them in a sleek black Cadillac, navigating through traffic with practiced ease, while Sal reviewed papers from a leather portfolio. They pulled up before an imposing limestone building with First National Bank of Chicago, engraved above massive bronze doors. Inside, the marble-floored lobby echoed with important footsteps and hushed conversations about money. Rosie noticed how people reacted to her grandfather, the respectful nods, the nervous glances, the way conversations paused as they passed. Sal seemed oblivious or perhaps simply accustomed to it, striding purposefully toward a desk where a balding man in a pinstriped suit immediately stood. "Mr. DeLuca, what a pleasure. We weren't expecting you until next week. Change of plans." "Harold," Sal gestured to Rosie, "my granddaughter needs access to the family accounts." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly as he assessed Rosie. "Of course, if you'll both follow me to the private conference room." They were led to a wood-paneled room with a table that gleamed like black glass. Harold excused himself, returning moments later with a distinguished older man who introduced himself as Mr. Thornton, the bank president. "Salvatore, it's been too long." He shook Sal's hand warmly. "And this must be Teresa's girl. The resemblance is remarkable." "Teresa passed last week," Sal said quietly. Thornton's face fell. "I'm deeply sorry to hear that. She was a lovely woman." He turned to Rosie. "My condolences, my dear." The following hour passed in a blur of paperwork and financial terminology. Rosie gathered that Sal was adding her name to several accounts, creating a trust in her name, and arranging for monthly stipends. The figures mentioned made her dizzy, more money than she'd ever imagined. "Is this really necessary?" she whispered to Sal as Thornton stepped out to retrieve additional documents. "Family takes care of family," Sal replied simply. "Besides, it's as much your mother's money as mine." She never took a penny when she left, proud as she was. When the paperwork was complete, Thornton handed Rosie a small brass key. "For your safety deposit box, Mr. DeLuca. Your grandfather has arranged for your mother's jewelry and important family documents to be transferred there." As they prepared to leave, Sal requested a moment alone with Thornton. "Wait in the lobby with Frank," he told Rosie. "This won't take long." In the grand lobby, Frank stood near a marble column, vigilant despite his relaxed posture. When Rosie approached, he straightened slightly. "Everything go all right, Mr. DeLuca?" "I think so. It's all a bit overwhelming." Frank's weathered face softened. "Mr. Salvatore takes care of his own. Always has. Even when they run away?" she asked pointedly, a careful pause. "Family's complicated. But at the end of the day, blood is blood." Rosie studied him. This man who had clearly served her grandfather for years, who must know more about the family secrets than he let on. "How long have you worked for my grandfather, Frank?" "Since 36, his eyes grew distant. Times were hard. The depression. Mr. Salvatore gave me a job when no one else would. Something like loyalty or perhaps fear flashed in his expression. He's a good man to those who are loyal to him. And to those who aren't? Frank's gaze sharpened. Miss DeLuca, some questions are better left unasked. He glanced over her shoulder. Here comes your grandfather now. The remainder of the morning was spent visiting the offices of DeLuca Imports on the near north side, a surprisingly modern building with DeLuca etched in Art Deco lettering above the entrance. Inside, clerks and secretaries moved with efficient purpose. Ledgers open on desks, telephones ringing, the clatter of typewriters creating a symphony of commerce. Sal introduced Rosie to key employees, referring to her as my granddaughter and heir, words that caused subtle shifts in how people regarded her. Where before they had been merely polite, now there was deference, curiosity, even a hint of wariness. In Sal's private office, a corner suite with windows overlooking the Chicago River, Rosie found herself studying the photographs on the walls. Unlike the house, which displayed family history, these documented business achievements, ribbon cuttings, handshakes with politicians. Charity galas, you've built quite an empire, she observed. Sal, reviewing correspondence at his desk, looked up. Started with one truck and a warehouse. Now we import from 12 countries. Pride colored his voice. Your grandmother insisted we diversify early. Smartest business advice I ever got. Is it all legitimate? Rosie asked carefully, a ghost of a smile. Worried about taking blood money, are you? Like your mother was. He set down his pen. Teresa never understood that in America, all old money has shadows attached to it. The Rockefellers, the Kennedys, you think their hands are clean? That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting today. He checked his pocket watch. We have a lunch reservation at the Palmer House. Afterward, I have business to attend to. Frank will take you shopping if you'd like. You'll need proper clothes for Chicago winter. As they prepared to leave, Sal's secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Winters, entered with an urgent message. Sal frowned as he read it. I need to make a call. Wait here. He disappeared into an adjoining room, closing the door firmly behind him. Left alone in her grandfather's office, Rosie felt the weight of her mother's warnings pressing against her curiosity. Teresa had fled this world, had raised Rosie to fear it. Yet here she was, being welcomed into it, offered security and connection. Almost without thinking, she moved to Sal's desk. The leather portfolio he'd been reviewing at the bank lay open, revealing columns of figures and notes in a tight, precise hand. Below it was a ledger bound in green leather, partially concealed by the portfolio. Glancing at the closed door, she carefully moved the portfolio aside. The ledger was older, its edges worn with use. Inside, entries dated back to 1930, each recording payments to various names, some businesses, others clearly individuals. The amounts varied widely, but all were substantial for the era. What caught her eye was a series of entries from January 1935, the month her father disappeared. Large payments to someone identified only as V occurred 3 times that month, the last on January 14th, 2 days after James Morgan went missing. The door handle turned. Rosie quickly slid the ledger back into place and stepped away from the desk. Sal appeared, face tense with barely controlled anger. Plans have changed. I need to handle a situation at the warehouse. He studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. Frank will take you home. Is everything okay? Business complications. Nothing for you to worry about. He gathered his papers, tucking the portfolio and ledger into a briefcase. Vittoria will prepare lunch for you. We'll continue our conversation at dinner. In the car heading back of the yards, Rosie watched the city scroll past the window, the gleaming commercial buildings giving way to factories and warehouses, then to neighborhoods of varying prosperity. Frank drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Frank, she said finally, who is V? The car swerved slightly before Frank corrected. Excuse me, Miss DeLuca. In my grandfather's ledger. There were payments to someone called V in January 1935. Frank's expression remained carefully neutral, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. I wouldn't know anything about Mr. Salvatore's business records. It was the month my father disappeared. The car slowed at a red light. Frank turned to look at her directly, his eyes hard with warning. Miss Rosie, for your own good, leave the past where it is. Some roads only lead to pain. I need to know what happened to him. Then ask your grandfather directly. But understand this." The light changed and Frank returned his attention to the road. Every family has secrets. The DeLucas more than most. Sometimes not knowing is a blessing. Back at the house, Rosie found Vittoria preparing lunch. Her movements agitated as she chopped vegetables with more force than necessary. "Is everything all right, Vittoria?" The housekeeper jumped slightly. "Miss Rosie, you startled me." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Everything's fine. Just fine." But Rosie had seen the telephone on the wall, its receiver still slightly askew as if recently replaced in haste. "Did my grandfather call?" A hesitation. "Mr. Salvatore said he'd be late tonight." "Business matters." Vittoria resumed her chopping, avoiding Rosie's eyes. "He asked me to tell you not to wait up." Later, alone in her mother's old bedroom, Rosie removed the newspaper clipping from her pocket, smoothing it carefully on the bedspread. Her father's face stared back at her, serious, intelligent, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. What had really happened to James Morgan? Why had her mother been so convinced that Sal was responsible? And who was the mysterious V who received thousands of dollars in the days surrounding his disappearance? Outside, the afternoon sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting weak shadows across the snow-covered yard. Somewhere in this city were answers about her father, about the real nature of her grandfather's business, about why her mother had lived in fear for 17 years. Rosie carefully refolded the clipping and placed it beneath her pillow. Tonight she would search Sal's home office. The ledger at his business had given her a thread to pull. Now she needed to follow it wherever it might lead, even if the truth was exactly what her mother had spent a lifetime running from. Chapter 4. The confession night descended on Chicago like a velvet curtain, accompanied by a light snowfall that muffled the usual urban sounds. Rosie waited until the grandfather clock downstairs struck 11, until Vittoria had retired to her room in the converted third-floor attic, until the house settled into its nighttime creaks and sighs. The hallway outside her bedroom was dark, illuminated only by slivers of moonlight through partially drawn curtains. She moved silently down the corridor, grateful for the thick carpet that swallowed her footsteps. Her destination was Sal's study, a room she'd glimpsed only in passing. Its door usually kept closed. The house was different at night, shadows elongated into strange shapes, familiar objects rendered mysterious in the darkness. Family photographs seemed to watch her progress, generations of DeLucas bearing silent witness to her trespassing. At Sal's study door she paused, listening. The house remained quiet. Taking a deep breath, she turned the handle and slipped inside. Moonlight filtered through Venetian blinds, striping the room with alternate bands of silver and shadow. Unlike the ornate formality of the rest of the house, Sal's private study was austere, almost Spartan. A military man's quarters rather than a mafioso's lair. A simple desk of dark wood dominated the space, flanked by filing cabinets and bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Rosie moved to the desk first, trying drawers only to find them locked. The surface held little of interest: a blotter, a pen set, a framed photograph of Constanza DeLuca, younger than in the parlor portrait, laughing beside a rosebush. Beside it, surprisingly, was a small frame containing a photograph of Rosie herself at about age 4, sitting on a beach in California. Photograph her mother must have sent, despite her claimed estrangement from Sal. Moving to the bookshelf, she ran her fingers along the spines, business ledgers dating back decades, books on Italian history, several volumes of Dante in the original Italian. On the bottom shelf, partially hidden behind a row of ledgers, she discovered a wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Holding her breath, she lifted it carefully. Unlike the desk drawers, it was unlocked. Inside lay a collection of letters, bound with faded blue ribbon, hair-tarnished pocket watch, and a small leather-bound journal. Rosie took the journal first, moving closer to the window, where moonlight provided enough illumination to read. The handwriting inside was not Sal's precise script, but a flowing feminine hand, her grandmother's diary. Entries were sporadic, spanning from 1925 to 1933, the year before Constanza's death. Most were mundane, notes about social engagements, Teresa's schooling, household matters. But an entry from December 1932 caught her eye. Salvatore grows more entangled with those men every day. I fear what he is becoming. He says it is all for us, for Teresa's future. But what future will she have if her father's name becomes synonymous with violence? I pray to the Madonna every night for his soul. Rosie flipped forward, finding an entry dated just 3 weeks before Constanza's death. The doctors say the cancer has spread too far. When I'm gone, who will temper Salvatore's darkness? Who will remind him of the gentle boy from Sicily who once wept at a wounded bird? Teresa is too young to understand the choices her father makes, the company he keeps. I have made him promise to keep her away from the business, to give her a chance at a life untainted. I only pray he remembers this promise when I am no longer here to remind him. The sound of a car engine outside startled her. Hastily, she returned the journal to the box, but kept the bundle of letters, slipping them into the pocket of her robe. She had just closed the box and returned it to its shelf when headlights swept across the window blinds. Sal was home. Rosie extinguished the small lamp she'd lit and moved quickly toward the door, pausing to listen for sounds from the hallway. Hearing nothing, she slipped out and was halfway to the stairs when a door opened behind her. Bit late for a midnight stroll, isn't it? She turned slowly. Sal stood in the doorway of the parlor, still in his overcoat, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He must have entered through the side door. I couldn't sleep, she managed. I was looking for something to read. His eyes, so like her mother's, studied her with uncomfortable intensity. In my study? I'm sorry. I was curious. He took a sip of his drink, whiskey by the smell of it. Curiosity is a DeLuca trait. Your grandmother had it. So did your mother. He gestured toward the parlor. Since we're both awake, we might as well talk. The parlor was warm, a banked fire still glowing in the grate. Sal added a log, stirring it until flames licked upward. He removed his overcoat, draping it over a chair, then settled into a leather armchair that had clearly molded itself to his form over years of use. What were you looking for, really? He asked, voice surprisingly gentle. Rosie perched on the edge of the sofa opposite him. Answers about my father. Sal's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. James Morgan has been gone for 17 years. Because someone killed him. Is that what Teresa told you? She said he would never have abandoned us willingly. Rosie leaned forward. She believed you were responsible. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the soft popping of the fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow against the windows in soft, persistent taps. Teresa was partly right, Sal finally said, voice heavy with something that might have been regret. I am responsible for what happened to your father, but not in the way she thought. He rose, moving to a cabinet where he poured himself another measure of whiskey. He gestured with the bottle toward Rosie, but she shook her head. James Morgan was a good man, Sal continued, returning to his chair. Too good for this world. Too good for the family he married into, though I didn't see that at first. What do you mean? When Teresa brought him home, all I saw was a schoolteacher with no money, no connections. Nothing to offer my daughter. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the firelight play through it. I tried to buy him off. He refused. I threatened him. He still refused. I came to respect his backbone even if I thought him a fool. Then what happened? Sal's gaze moved to the fire. In 34, I got involved with some people I shouldn't have. Borrowed money from the wrong men. When I couldn't pay it back fast enough, they started making threats. Not against me, but against my family. His voice hardened. No one threatens a DeLuca. Rosie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. What did you do? I made arrangements to pay them back. Took some risks in my business. James found out. Sal's eyes, when they met hers, held a weariness she hadn't seen before. Your father was honest to a fault. He confronted me, said he'd go to the police if necessary to protect Teresa. And you had him killed. The words fell between them like stones. No. Sal set down his glass with careful precision. I warned him. Told him what kind of men he was dealing with, what they'd do to him, to Teresa if he talked. A long pause. He didn't listen. Rosie's heart pounded in her chest. Then what happened? James went to a detective he knew. Not directly to the police. He was trying to find a compromise, I think. A way to protect Teresa without destroying her father. Sal's voice grew distant, as if he were seeing it all again. 3 days later, he disappeared on his way home from school. Who was V? Rosie asked suddenly. The person in your ledger who received payments that month. Surprise flickered across Sal's face, quickly masked. You've been thorough in your investigation. Who was it? Vincent Calabresi, a private investigator I hired to find James after he disappeared. A bitter smile touched his lips. Ironic, isn't it? Teresa believed I'd had him killed when I was desperately trying to find him before the Marconi brothers did. Did you find him? Sal's silence was answer enough. There was a body. Not enough of one to identify. His voice was barely a whisper now. The Marconis wanted to send a message. To me through your father. Rosie felt sick, the room suddenly too warm, too close. And my mother never knew? I tried to tell her. She wouldn't listen. Grief and fear had poisoned her mind against me. She took you and ran before I could explain. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. I've spent 17 years looking for both of you. Sent men to California, hired detectives. Teresa was too clever, always moving, changing names. She was terrified of you. With good reason. The men I dealt with back then, they were animals. I was becoming one too. He gestured around the room. All this, the business, the house, the respectability, built on blood and fear. Your grandmother warned me, but I was too proud to listen. Grandmother's journal, Rosie murmured. I saw it in your study, Sal nodded. Constanza knew what I was becoming. On her deathbed, she made me promise to keep Teresa away from the business, to give her a chance at a clean life. His lips twisted in a sad smile. In the end, Teresa did that herself, by running from me. Rosie thought of the letters in her pocket, her grandmother's words, perhaps? Or correspondence between her parents. She'd examine them later when she was alone. Why are you telling me all this now? Because you deserve the truth. Because I'm an old man with more regrets than years left. Sal rubbed his face, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. And because I hope you might stay. Help me rebuild what's left of this family. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, a new day beginning as old secrets came to light. Rosie studied her grandfather's face, seeing in it echoes of her mother, of herself. The man Teresa had feared, and the grieving father searching for his daughter could exist in the same person, she realized. People were more complicated than the stories told about them. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said finally. For my father. For what happened to my mother. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding, and perhaps a chance to know my only grandchild before I die. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. This was meant for your 18th birthday. It seems right you should have it now. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When opened, it revealed a tiny photograph of Teresa as a young woman, smiling, carefree in a way Rosie had rarely seen her mother. It was Constanza's, Sal explained. She would have wanted you to have it. As Rosie fastened the locket around her neck, she felt the weight of her family's past, the secrets, the pain, the tangled loyalties that bound them even across years of separation. Outside, Chicago slumbered beneath its blanket of snow, the city itself a testament to how beauty and grit could exist side by side. I'll stay, she said finally. For now. Relief softened Sal's features. That's all I ask. Later, alone in her room, Rosie untied the blue ribbon binding the letters. They were indeed from her father to her mother, love letters spanning their courtship and brief marriage. In them, James Morgan emerged not just as the victim of her grandfather's world, but as a man of principle, intelligence, and deep devotion. The final letter, dated January 10th, 1935, just 2 days before his disappearance, contained words that made her breath catch. My dearest Teresa, I fear I've made a terrible mistake confronting your father. The men he's involved with are more dangerous than I imagined. If anything happens to me, know that everything I've done has been to protect you and our child. There's a safety deposit box at First Chicago, key hidden in our special place. Inside is evidence that may one day be needed. I pray it never comes to that. Remember always that love is stronger than fear, and the truth, however painful, eventually finds the light. Forever yours. James. Rosie stared at the letter, mind racing. The safety deposit box. Could it still exist after all these years? And what special place had her parents shared? Outside her window, the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. Tomorrow, today, she would begin her search for her father's final legacy. Not for vengeance, but for the truth he'd valued so highly. The locket felt warm against her skin, A reminder of the grandmother she'd never known, the mother she'd just lost, and the family legacy now resting in her hands, a legacy of both darkness and light. Chapter 5. Legacy Morning. Arrived with a clarity that only follows a snowstorm. Brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine white, the world scrubbed clean and dazzling. Rosie dressed with purpose, choosing a charcoal wool skirt and burgundy sweater that had belonged to her mother, adding the locket Sal had given her the night before. At breakfast, Sal seemed different, the burden of his confession having lifted something from his shoulders. He watched her over the rim of his coffee cup, eyes taking in the locket with quiet approval. "I have meetings this morning," he said, breaking a companionable silence. "But I've told Frank to take you wherever you'd like to go today. Thank you. There are some places from Mum's stories I'd like to see." It wasn't entirely a lie. Teresa had spoken of Chicago occasionally, in unguarded moments when nostalgia overwhelmed caution. Sal nodded. "The city's changed since she lived here. Some things for the better, some not." He hesitated. "When you get back, I'd like to show you something. Something I should have shown Teresa years ago." After he left, Rosie approached Vittoria in the kitchen, where she was kneading bread dough with practiced hands. "Vittoria, did my mother have any special places in Chicago? Somewhere important to her and my father?" The housekeeper's hands stilled. Miss Teresa loved the Art Institute. Mr. James proposed to her there by the Monet water lilies. She said it was because he knew she loved beautiful things. A small smile touched her lips. "Your grandfather nearly had a stroke when she announced the engagement. Did they have any other special places? Maybe somewhere they kept things." Vittoria resumed her kneading, but her expression grew thoughtful. There was a bookshop on Harper Avenue, near the university where Mr. James taught. Literary Treasures, it was called, run by an old professor. Teresa mentioned once that James had a standing order there, first editions of poetry for their anniversaries. An hour later, Frank drove Rosie through the snow-blanketed streets of Hyde Park. The University of Chicago's Gothic spires, rising against the winter blue sky. Literary Treasures was still there, a narrow storefront sandwiched between a pharmacy and a tailor shop, its window display featuring leather-bound classics and modern first editions under subtle lighting. A bell chimed softly as Rosie entered. The interior was warm, aromatic with the scent of old paper and binding glue. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves created a labyrinth of literary treasures, exactly as the name promised. Behind an antique desk sat an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a tweed jacket, exactly as one would expect in such a setting. He looked up as she approached, sharp eyes assessing her with scholarly precision. "Good morning. Something particular you're seeking today?" "Information, actually." Rosie hesitated. "Did you know James and Teresa Morgan? They were customers here in the 1930s. The bookseller's expression shifted, recognition and sadness mingling in the deep lines of his face. "James Morgan was one of my most valued customers, a true bibliophile with excellent taste." He removed his glasses. "You must be their daughter. The resemblance to Teresa is remarkable. You remember them after all these years?" "My dear, in my business, books and their owners become part of one's extended family." He stood, extending a hand. "Professor Edwin Caldwell, retired English department. Now I just sell the books instead of teaching them. Rosie Morgan. Actually DeLuca now, I suppose. So you've returned to your grandfather's name. Interesting." Caldwell gestured toward a reading nook with comfortable leather chairs. "Please sit. I suspect we have much to discuss." Over the next half hour, Caldwell shared memories of James Morgan, a brilliant young mathematics professor who'd often stop by the shop after classes, browsing the stacks for hours. How Teresa would sometimes accompany him, the obvious love between them touching even to an old academic like himself. "The last time I saw James," Caldwell said, voice lowering, "was 2 days before he disappeared. He seemed troubled, distracted. Left a package with me for safekeeping." Rosie's heart quickened. "A package?" "Said if anything happened to him I should keep it until Teresa came for it." Caldwell's eyes clouded with memory. "She never did. Came to the shop once after he vanished, but she was different. Frightened. Said she was leaving Chicago and never coming back." "Do you still have it?" "The package?" Caldwell studied her face as if searching for something. Whatever he sought, he apparently found it, because he nodded once and rose. "Wait here." He disappeared into a back room, returning minutes later with a small wooden box, simply crafted but elegant in its clean lines. "I've kept it all these years, hoping someone would come." James was adamant it should stay in the family. With trembling hands, Rosie accepted the box. It was lighter than she expected, with no lock, just a simple brass latch. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay 3 items: a small brass key, a folded sheet of paper, and a pocket watch. "The key is to a safety deposit box," Rosie murmured, remembering James's letter. "That would make sense," Caldwell agreed. "James mentioned something about evidence, though he wouldn't elaborate. Said the less I knew, the safer I'd be." The paper contained a sequence of numbers, 2015-819, and below them, a single word, Dante. The pocket watch was silver, engraved on the back with James Morgan's initials and a date, their wedding day. "The numbers could be a combination," Caldwell suggested, "or a code of some kind." Rosie traced the engraved letters on the watch. "And Dante. My grandfather has volumes of Dante in his study." Caldwell's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Sal. "You're staying with Salvatore DeLuca?" "Yes, he's—" "Not what I expected." A careful silence then. "People rarely are, especially those who've lived through difficult times. The Depression changed many good men." "And the war," Rosie added, remembering that her grandfather had served briefly in Italy during World War II as a translator for the army. "Indeed." Caldwell glanced at his watch. "The bank will be closing soon. If you intend to use that key today, you should hurry." Outside, Frank was waiting patiently in the Cadillac. Rosie hesitated before getting in, turning back to Caldwell, who had followed her to the door. "Thank you for keeping this safe all these years," the old bookseller nodded. "Your father was a man of principle in an unprincipled time. Whatever you find, remember that." He hesitated, then added softly, "And be careful, Miss DeLuca. Some secrets are buried for a reason." At First Chicago National Bank, the same Mr. Thornton who had assisted with her accounts the previous day personally escorted her to the safety deposit vault. The brass key slid smoothly into box number 1935. The year of her father's disappearance, Rosie realized with a chill. Inside was a leather portfolio, its surface cracked with age. Heart racing, she carried it to a private viewing room where she carefully untied the faded ribbon that bound it. The contents were meticulously organized. Photographs, handwritten notes, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be financial records, all dating from 1934 to 35. As Rosie sorted through them, her father's investigation took shape. James Morgan had been tracking money movements between Sal's legitimate business and several shell companies, connecting them to notorious figures in Chicago's underworld. One name appeared repeatedly: Vincent Marconi, head of a rival operation to Sal's. According to James's notes, Sal had become indebted to Marconi after a series of failed ventures during the worst of the Depression. When he couldn't repay in cash, Marconi demanded other forms of payment: favors, services, eventually partnership in Sal's growing import business. Most damning was a series of photographs showing Sal meeting with Marconi and other known criminals. In one taken at what appeared to be a warehouse, money visibly changed hands. On the back, James had written, "S. DeLuca delivering payment to V. Marconi, Jan 8, 1935. The final document in the portfolio was a letter addressed to Teresa, dated the day of James's disappearance. "My beloved Teresa, if you're reading this, my fears have been realized. What began as concern for your safety has become something larger, a matter of right and wrong that transcends even my love for you and our child. The evidence I've gathered proves your father's involvement with men who have brought misery and corruption to this city. I've made copies of everything, one set for the district attorney, one for you. I don't believe Salvatore is inherently evil. His choices began from desperation to provide for his family during the darkest days of the Depression. But intentions matter less than actions, and his actions have caused harm. I pray that someday he finds redemption and that you find peace. Know that whatever happens, my love for you and our child is eternal, the one pure and uncomplicated truth in a world of shadows. All my love." James. Rosie sat motionless, the letter in her hands. As pieces shifted in her understanding, her father hadn't been naive. He'd understood exactly what he was confronting. And Sal. Her grandfather had told her part of the truth, but not all. He'd tried to find James, yes, but only after his association with Marconi had put him in danger. The safety deposit box held one final item, a small envelope containing a key to a different lock. Written on the envelope in her father's neat script, Morgan Family Trust, Chicago Mercantile. By the time Rosie emerged from the bank, afternoon shadows were lengthening across the snow. Frank, ever vigilant, stood by the car, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Everything all right, Mr. DeLuca? You look pale." "Just tired, Frank." She slipped the portfolio into her handbag. "I'd like to go home now." The DeLuca mansion was quiet when they arrived, only Vittoria's humming from the kitchen indicating life within its walls. Rosie went directly to her room. Securing her father's documents beneath the loose floorboard, she'd discovered her second night in the house. The pocket watch and the numerical sequence she kept with her, along with both keys. Whatever Dante referred to, she suspected the answer lay in Sal's study, in his collection of the Italian poet's works. As dusk gathered, turning the snow-covered garden to shades of lavender and blue, Sal returned. His footsteps on the stairs were heavier than usual, his greeting to Vittoria subdued. Rosie met him in the parlor, where he stood warming his hands by the freshly built fire. "Did you find what you were looking for today?" he asked, his back still to her. Something in his tone made her pause. "Some of it. I visited a bookshop my mother mentioned. Literary treasures." Sal turned, his expression unreadable. "Edwin Caldwell still runs it, I presume." Surprise must have shown on her face, because Sal's mouth curved in a mirthless smile. "I know more than you think. Rosie, I've had 17 years to piece together your father's last days." He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit. It's time I showed you what I mentioned this morning." From an inside pocket, Sal withdrew a small key, similar to the one from her father's box, but newer, less tarnished. "This opens my personal safe. After our conversation last night, I realized there are things you should see, things I should have shown Teresa years ago." He crossed to a painting, a Venetian canal scene that had hung in the parlor for decades. Swinging it aside revealed a wall safe with an antiquated dial lock. Sal turned the dial deliberately. 2015-819, the same numbers from her father's note. "My wife's birthday," Sal explained, inserting the key. "April 20th, 1908. Constanza would have been 79 this year." The safe door swung open, revealing several leather-bound ledgers, a stack of documents and a small pistol. Sal removed one ledger and a manila envelope, then closed the safe. "Your father was right about many things," he said, returning to his chair. "I did make deals I shouldn't have. Did business with men who corrupted everything they touched. The Depression took my legitimate business, and I chose survival over principles." He opened the ledger, turning it so Rosie could see the neat columns of figures. "This is the real record of those years, every payment, every compromise, every debt." His finger traced a particular entry, "Including the money I paid Vincent Calabrese, not to find your father, but to warn him that Marconi was looking for him. You lied to me. I told you part of the truth, the part I could bear to face." Sal's eyes, when they met hers, held a weariness that went bone deep. "I didn't have James killed, but my dealings with Marconi put a target on him once he started asking questions. I am responsible, just not in the way Teresa believed." He handed her the manila envelope. "These are the last photographs taken of James. My men found his car abandoned near the lake. Inside was his briefcase, but the evidence he'd gathered was already gone. Marconi's people had beaten us there." The photographs showed a 1933 Ford coupe, driver's door ajar, parked at an odd angle near a deserted stretch of lakefront. Close-ups captured details: a hat on the passenger seat, a mathematics textbook, a smear of what might have been blood on the steering wheel. "We never found his body," Sal continued, voice hollow. "Marconi's signature was bodies in the lake, weighted down. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late to save him. All I could do was protect Teresa and you, by letting her believe you were responsible." Rosie's voice cracked with emotion. "By allowing her to live in fear for 17 years. She wouldn't listen. She was so consumed by grief and terror that she ran before I could explain." Real pain etched lines around Sal's eyes. "I sent men to find you both, to bring you home where I could protect you. Teresa saw them as a threat, not salvation. And Marconi. What happened to him?" A dangerous stillness came over Sal's features. Vincent Marconi disappeared in 1937. His body was never found. The implication hung in the air between them, neither needing to voice it. Sal had eventually exacted his revenge, not just for business reasons, but for family. After Marconi, I made changes, Sal continued. Legitimate investments, political connections that didn't require favors. I built something Teresa and you could inherit without shame. His hands, liver-spotted with age but still strong, closed the ledger. Too late for her to see it. Maybe not too late for you. Outside, fresh snow had begun to fall, adding new layers to the pristine blanket covering Chicago. Rosie thought of her father's final letter, his belief that Sal wasn't inherently evil, just a man who had made desperate choices in desperate times. She thought of her mother, who had lived and died believing the worst. And she thought of the locket around her neck, connecting her to generations of DeLuca women who had faced their own impossible choices. The numbers, she said finally. 2015, 819. They were in my father's things too, along with the word Dante. Surprise flickered across Sal's face. Inferno Canto 15, verses 819. Your father was cleverer than I gave him credit for. What do those verses say? They speak of exile and return, of finding someone from home in a place far from where you began. Sal's expression softened. James knew Italian literature almost as well as mathematics. He and I actually had that in common, though neither of us acknowledged it. Did you ever respect him? Really? By the end? Yes. He stood against me knowing what it might cost because he believed it was right. A ghost of a smile touched Sal's lips. You have that same quality. So did your mother. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times. Vittoria would be expecting them for dinner soon. A normal family ritual in a house that had seen anything but normal family dynamics. What happens now? Rosie asked. That depends on you. Sal carefully returned the ledger to the safe, spinning the dial to reset the lock. I'm an old man with many regrets and few years left to make amends. The business is legitimate now. Import, export, real estate, investments. It could be yours someday if you wanted it. And if I don't, then I'll make arrangements. But I hope you'll stay regardless. Get to know the grandfather Teresa never let you have. He looked suddenly vulnerable, a shadow of the feared businessman Chicago knew. We're family. The only family either of us has left. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner where both were lost in their own thoughts, Rosie stood in the conservatory, uncovering the piano once more. As her fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne, she felt the presence of those who had come before. Her grandmother Constanza, who had tried to steer Sal toward a better path. Her mother Teresa, who had protected her daughter the only way she knew how. Her father James, who had stood for principle even knowing the cost. And now here she was, Rosetta DeLuca Morgan, carrying all their legacies in her blood. The past couldn't be changed, but perhaps the future could be shaped differently. Perhaps there was a way to honor both her parents' memory and forge a relationship with the complicated man who was her grandfather. From the doorway came the sound of a throat clearing. Sal stood there, tentative in a way she wouldn't have believed possible days ago. May I join you? He asked. Rosie moved over on the piano bench, making space. As Sal settled beside her, she began to play again. The music a bridge across decades of absence, a language they could share when words failed. Outside, Chicago continued its winter transformation, snow erasing the day's footprints, preparing a clean slate for tomorrow. Inside, 2 survivors of a family fractured by choices, circumstances and time found a fragile harmony amidst the echoes of all they had lost and might yet reclaim. If this story touched your heart, if the journey of Rosie and Salvatore resonated with your own experiences of family complexities, forgiveness, and the courage to face difficult truths, please consider subscribing to join our storytelling community. The echoes of our past shape who we become, and sometimes the most profound healing begins when we're brave enough to look beyond what we think we know about those closest to us. In the weeks that followed, Rosie settled into a new routine at the DeLuca mansion. She enrolled in classes at the University of Chicago, walking the same campus where her father had once taught. She spent evenings in the conservatory, bringing music back to a house that had been silent for too long. And gradually, She and Sal built a relationship, not perfect, not without shadows of the past, but genuine in its cautious affection. The safety deposit box at Chicago Mercantile had revealed one final surprise: a trust fund James had established for his unborn child. Modest professor's savings that had grown over 17 years into enough for Rosie's education and a fresh start when she was ready. On a Sunday in early spring, as the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow in the garden, Rosie and Sal visited two graves: her grandmother Constanza's in the Catholic cemetery, where generations of DeLucas rested, and a memorial marker for James Morgan that Sal had arranged, placed beside the now empty plot reserved for Teresa, whose ashes Rosie had brought home to Chicago. "Family belongs together," Sal said simply, placing white roses on both markers. "In the end, that's what matters most." Standing there, between her past and her future, Rosie touched the locket at her throat and thought of her mother's final words: "What matters most is what we leave behind." Teresa had left her courage and resilience. James had left his principles and love of knowledge. Even Sal, complicated and flawed, would one day leave her a legacy both troubled and redeemed. From all of them, she had inherited the freedom to choose her own path forward, perhaps the greatest gift any family can offer. As they walked back toward the car where Frank waited, Sal's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not guiding, just present. The touch of family. The echo of belonging. The promise of tomorrow, built on all the yesterdays that had brought them to this moment of fragile, hard-won peace. "Let's go home," Rosie said, and meant it. The end.